Hi everyone, and welcome to our two-part video which is addressing the topic of voices, characters, and personas. So in today's lesson, we're going to be really breaking down the way that voices, characters, and personas are constructed and used in texts. So firstly, we'll be looking at what is voice. Secondly, we'll be looking at how does voice create characters and persona. Thirdly, we'll be looking at how we can trace examples of usage in prose, poetry, and drama. So looking at the way of these three major text types make use of voice as a technique. So let's start by looking at what voice is. So you may not be familiar with this concept, however it's something that even if you don't understand as a mechanism of voice, you probably have thought about it without actually knowing that that's what you're thinking about. So voice is the way that a character expresses their personality, beliefs, and concerns. The language of voices, characters, and personas commonly appear in novels, plays, and poems. So this idea of constructing voice is the way that a character is created and the way that a character can express their feelings and their frustrations. Voice can reflect the time period of the text and also things like the class status or education of the characters. So these are all things that we're going to be examining in significant detail in this video. This may seem like a difficult concept to understand, but soon you will see that what makes voices hard to read is also what makes them distinctive. So while a voice may seem unfamiliar, different, or strange, this is actually going to be really useful for you because that's something which you can analyze and write about in your essays. Voices are given character through language techniques, grammar, word choice, accents, and contractions. So these are all the sorts of techniques which we'll be looking at one by one in detail, really to ensure that you have a good understanding of what voice is and how voice is created. So firstly, let's examine the aims of voice in writing. So there are a number of different things which voice is able to achieve. It achieves originality, individuality in writing, and really ensures that characters are well constructed and expressed. So the first aim is being individual, authentic, and original in form and style. The second aim is to develop and display authentic characters and personalities. The third aim is to create an appropriate tone for purpose and audience. So a lot of about voice is addressing your material towards the audience which you know is going to be reading your text and adjusting your language based on what you think their demands as a group are. So let's look at how we create voice. Now, this is obviously quite a difficult and significant process which authors undertake in order to ensure that their texts are distinctive and individual. So firstly, language is an extremely important way of creating voice as a technique. Language gives insight into a character's personality. It expresses their status, for example, how educated they are and how they interact or are ranked against other characters. So the ways in which characters express themselves through language really gives you a very helpful indication of the sort of person they are and the sort of things they might support or symbolize or stand for example. For example, language could be practical and include a lot of imagery or contain a lot of jargon. So the different ways that language are used give you good indications of the factors that are influencing the character's creation and are also experiencing the characters through the way that they express themselves. So obviously through language, you can have a much better understanding of the character through the way that they phrase their speech and the way that they interact with the people around them. Secondly, tone is an extremely important technique. Now, the character's tone reveals information about their world. For example, the use of swear words or slang is going to suggest certain things about certain characters. The author's tone builds the scene and creates mood. For example, things like nostalgia, happiness, or tragedy is created through the author's tone and the author's voice, which is seen as sort of the overarching thing which underlays the text. The third way of creating voice is through form. Now, voice can be shown through varying the traditional structure that is traditionally used in texts. So, for example, authors can use shifts in time, place, and flashbacks to create and experiment with different tones of voice. Another technique which is able to be used is the technique of characterization through dialogue. Now, characters express their voice through dialogue. It's literally the way that they talk to each other. So obviously that's going to be literally the way that voice is created in texts. The way that characters speak and interact gives a really good indication of their personalities to the reader. So it's something you should definitely be looking out for. For example, the naive voice of a young child is obviously going to be very different to the strong and serious voice of a newsreader. So we're not just talking about literally the sound of how their voice sounds, but the way in which their voice expresses language techniques, for example, language techniques, and the way in which they interact with other characters. A fifth technique is narration. Now, some characters additionally express their thoughts through narration to the audience. So there might be moments in text where characters aren't actually addressing other characters, but are addressing the audience and telling their experiences to the audience. This allows particular emphasis to be placed on their point of view as their perspective becomes the main focus. So their perspective really becomes the emphasized factors of what is being told and what is being explained. Word choice is obviously a sub-element of language, but is also the sixth technique of creating voice. Words chosen give insight into the person behind the voice. So obviously words are going to influence, the type of background that a person's from and the sort of things that they want to be expressing through their speech. So for example, consider these things. Are the words short or are they long? Technical or simple? Conversational or formal? Are they jargon or are they ordinary? Are they poetic or are they very straight and standard? The seventh technique is that of accents. Now you'll see that all of these techniques are really interacting with each other. Obviously things like accents and word choice are all going to be working together to create elements of language which creates voice. So you see the strong interaction between techniques. Authors can express accents through their writing. For example, accents can give us really good information about the character and might cause us to bring in our own knowledge about that country or language. So if we hear a certain accent, we might associate certain things with what we hear. If we hear "G'day, mate," we're going to instantly know that this is an Australian voice, and think about what connotations that might have for the text. The eighth technique is grammar. Now, you must consider when you're constructing voice that, for example, excessive punctuation could express a fast-paced, action-packed, out-of-breath voice. However, well-used punctuation can also express status. And a lack of punctuation could show confusion or a poor education. Things like grammar can really be seen to, although they seem to be like a small element, actually have a very significant impact. A ninth technique is building relationships. Now, the way characters' voices compare highlights their relationships. So when two voices are juxtaposed, they become very distinctive. Consider a strong voice versus a weak voice, which suggests an unequal relationship. For example, a conversation between a policeman and a criminal. Evenly matched voices, though, would show the exact opposite. They would show positive and equal relationships. So here we see that through contrasting different voices, the actually elements of the voice are enhanced and made more obvious. So let's look at the differences between some of the terminology that I've been using. All of these things might seem to be sounding quite similar, but there are small distinctions between these different elements. So firstly, tone is the overall quality of the piece. We can compare this to the mood, which is the feelings or state of mind which are linked to the piece. This is obviously different to the idea of atmosphere, which is the environment created by the tone and mood. So the atmosphere is the product of those two earlier elements. Voice is the way that tone, mood, and atmosphere all come together and are expressed by the writer and the characters. So the way in which all of these elements work together makes the voice. And we'll be tracing this in the rest of our video when we look at specific examples of how voice is constructed. So that brings us to the end of the first part of our two-part video on constructing voice. If you join us in just a moment in part 2, We'll be looking at the way in which specific examples of voice can illustrate to you the fact that voice can be constructed by text and also has very significant implications for you as a reader.